Hey everyone, thanks for joining me again. This is part 6 in a series of videos that make up a tutorial called Build a Website with Gatsby. And in the last video, what we did was we used Gatsby Image, or the Gatsby Image plugin, to bring images to our site in a nice way that made the user experience better and made our performance a little bit better. So if you recall, we had these little thumbnails, and when we refreshed our page, for example, we would see the lazy loading blurry thing happening here. But you may have run into a problem using Gatsby Image, and in particular trying to bring in your images from your blog post metadata. And the error that you might have run into, or one of the errors that you might have run into, was this one here. And in this Gatsby issue, the author refers to it as the infamous GraphQL error: field image must not have a selection since type string has no subfields. Now, if you look at our graphical interface, we can see that our image does have subfields, right? And it has, in particular, child image sharp, and then another subfield of fluid with that. But in some cases, it seems to be that the Gatsby platform will infer that your field type for your image is a string rather than a file. So take a look at your code editor in any one of those blog posts. For example, Gatsby, if it infers that your title is a string, then it correctly infers that, and same with the date. But with the image, we don't want it to infer a string type. We want it to infer a file type. And you can see an example of Gatsby's inference usage if you go to the Gatsby Node APIs documentation, under Create Schema Customization, you can see that this person, or this example, wants Gatsby to not infer anything by using this don't infer command. We like the fact that Gatsby's inferring that our title is a string and that our date is a string, but we just don't like it we wouldn't like it if Gatsby were to infer that our image was a string, and it might do that. And in fact, it may have done that for some of you. It's done that for me several times, and like a lot of people, I just pulled my hair out trying to fix this. Excuse me. So what you can do to reproduce the error if you didn't see the error is, again, go to the Gatsby APIs, create schema customization bit of code here, grab all of it, and then in your project, in the root, create a new file, and that's Gatsby Node. Alright, and then go ahead and paste in that code. Right, there's a bit of it you don't need. You can get rid of create field extension. That's not necessary here. Get rid of anything corresponding to that. Alright, so you see here we've got this typedefs thing. If you've dealt with GraphQL before, you know that you have to create a schema, and then you also have to create typedefs and resolvers to handle things. These typedefs basically just tell you if you have a field, what types the field should be and whether they're required fields or not. For example, here you have in your front matter, the title is a required field and it should take a string. Right, so you shouldn't be adding in anything other than a string here. Right, and again, it says here that in this case it doesn't want Gatsby to infer anything, but we want Gatsby to infer field types, just not for the image. Alright, so what we can do is get rid of that. Get rid of all of this. Now, according to this code, Gatsby should infer that the image is of type file, but let's tell it to infer that it is of type string so that we can reproduce that error. Doesn't matter if you make it required or not. If you put an exclamation point, that makes it required. If not, it doesn't. So, or just like our Gatsby config file, if we update our Gatsby node file, we need to restart our dev server. So let's do that now. And we should see that error Okay, so we do see an error here, and it says field image must not have a selection since type string has no subfields. Right, if we go to our home page and refresh it, we do get that error. Right, and that's exactly what this person was getting here. Excuse me. So I'm running the air conditioner today and my throat keeps drying out. It's pretty hot where I am. I'm in Tokyo. I don't know where you're at, but if it's as hot as it is here, you might be using the air conditioner as well, if you have one. Now, if you go to the Gatsby Node APIs file and you look at the part where we got our code from, the Gatsby schema customization, right, you'll see all of the stuff that we just omitted. And again, what we want is we want to make sure that Gatsby infers, or sorry, it doesn't infer a file type here. It knows that it doesn't infer a field type here, but it knows that this field, the image field, should have a type file. So copy that, go back to your code, and paste that in. Alright, again, we've updated our Gatsby node, so we'll need to stop and restart our dev server. So do that. So it doesn't look like we're getting that error. So if you go to your home page, right, and you refresh it, you get your stuff back. All right, good. So that's how to fix that problem, that error, if it does come up. This seems to be kind of a bug with Gatsby. It just infers the right field type sometimes, and at other times it doesn't. So if you run into that error, this is how you fix it. So anyway, on to what today's video is about. In this video, what we're going to do is make it so that we can click on any of these post titles and go to its corresponding full blog post page. Right? So we'll need to create just one template, and we'll use that template and we'll inject dynamically whatever data we need to inject from our markdown files into that template page so that it renders the blog post with the correct content. Right? So it'll have to know which data goes to which page, and the first thing we'll need to do is we'll need to make sure that we have a correct file path, and we do that by creating slugs. All right, so Gatsby has in their documentation excuse me again, a bit on creating pages for blog posts, right? And here the first thing it shows you is how to create a node field, right? How to create those slugs, right? Because now if you look at our graphical interface, and we'll refresh that, you see that for our node, right, we don't have a fields object, right, which we should, right, because we're going to want to do what they're doing here, and in their query you can see they're querying the fields object and its corresponding slug here. So we don't have the fields object yet here because we haven't created a node field yet. So we're going to do that by just grabbing this bit of code right here. Let's copy that and putting it in our Gatsby node file, and you can put it under your create schema customization object. Let's paste that in there. You'll also need to bring create file path in from Gatsby source file system, and we've already got the Gatsby source file system in our project. All right, so at the top of your Gatsby node file, you can put that in. Okay, and if we stop and restart our dev server, we should be able to see the fields object and the slug field in our graphical interface. Alright, so I've been seeing this error quite a bit. That means probably I should close out my graphical editor and my localhost 8001 time. run a Gatsby clean. And then try to restart the dev server. Alright, so if I refresh my graphical interface, I can see that now in my node object, I now have the fields, because I created that node field, and it has the slugs for our posts. And we can actually look at that. So get rid of the front matter bit. Wow, I'm having trouble with my mouse today. Forgive me. All right, and run the query. And you can see that those slugs have been created, and what they are is basically your markdown file names minus the file extension part. So if you go in here, right, you can see first post is first post without the MD, and second post and third post are the same. Okay, so we've created slugs, which means we can create links to our individual blog post pages. Right, so going back to the programmatically creating pages part of the Gatsby documentation. Go down below, here we grab this bit to create our node field. Go down below that and actually keep going. And grab this bit here. And this is where we'll create our pages. So copy that. And in your Gatsby node file, put that here. Alright, so we can see if this query is getting, or what this query is getting, or if it's at least giving us what we need to get. And we should close this off with a curly brace. So underneath the query, we can console log the result, which is defined up here, but we'll need to stringify it first. So okay, stop and restart your server. And if you scroll up, you can see here that's what we logged to the console, so we're getting what we need in our data. Here you can see all the slugs. Okay. Alright, so we don't need that anymore. So now we'll need to send this data, or we'll need to use this data in programmatically creating pages. So we'll need a little bit more. So go back to the Gatsby documentation. And then grab this bit right here. Copy it. And just under your query, paste that in. And you won't need this. You won't need that. In fact, you don't need any of the comments, but alright, so what this is doing is it's taking all of the nodes, it's looping over the edges array, and it's for each node it's creating a page, right, as it should, because each node represents a markdown file, and each markdown file represents a blog post, which corresponds to an individual page. Alright, it creates a path using the slug, and to do that we're going to need path, so bring that in, and that's already in Node. You don't have to import it. Alright, so again down here we got it to create the path based on the slug. Now we want it to put it in a file, or we want to put our pages in a file not called blog post, but just called post. You could call it blog post, I just don't want to. In a folder called templates in our src folder. Alright, so we'll do that, but I'd like to clean things up a little bit here. So just take this and cut it. And up here in your create pages bit, define something called post template and set that equal to what we just put to the clipboard. Alright, and then down here we can just put in post template. Good. And then with GraphQL, if you create a GraphQL server, you have this context object, right? So for example, excuse me, when you log in with your credentials, say like your email and your password and all that, it puts a user on the context, right? So that, for example, you could check to see whether the user was actually logged in or not when a person decided to access a route that was restricted to users only. Right, and the context gets passed to, I think, everything. But basically, all of your GraphQL queries, or all of your pages, sorry, that you create will have this context passed to them, and you can pass along the slug as a variable. Right? And we'll need to do that because if we don't do that and we just tried to hard code in the slug for each page, we'd have to create an individual page for each blog post. But what we'd rather do is have a variable slug so that according to the page we want to look at, which depends on the link that we've clicked on, then we'll want to see the page that corresponds to that post specifically using one single template and dynamically injected data. Alright, so that's a lot of talking. We'll see how that works in just a bit. But for now, we should be creating our pages okay with this code. So stop and restart your server. It looks like we've gotten an error here. So it says your site's Gatsby Node.js created a page with a component that doesn't exist, and that's because we said to create this page, but we actually haven't added it to our project yet. So what you want to do is go into your src folder, create another folder called templates, and within that folder create a file called post.js. And we'll need a corresponding style sheet. And I don't know why I just put a post.js in styles. That was terrible. Should be post.scss. Alright. So let's try to rerun our dev server again. Looks like we're good now. Go to your home page. And if you put in that extension, or one of the extensions, for example, our blog post, first post, would have the extension first, or the route first post, not fist post. All right, that takes us to our blog page, right? And we've created the template page. We haven't injected any data into it, and we don't even have our layout set up within it. So let's set that up now. Alright, so now we've got our layout in there. Let's use the same font we've been using, which was Railway, at least for our title. Alright, so let's think about our structure for our page. Another div with the main content. Put the title in there. Okay, so that takes care of that. We'll want to keep our content in the center of the page. Sorry about that. And so what we can do is we can set the main part, set the widths to, I like to set it to 50%. Make sure it's in the middle. Alright, and if you missed what I just did because I forgot to switch over to the code editor, all I did was I set the main content widths to 50% and the margin to auto. You might want to use the text-align property to put the title in the center of the page. I usually don't do that with my blog posts. Alright, so, but you know, we don't want this. This is a blog post. We want the actual title of the blog post, and we want to make sure that it corresponds to the blog post we're looking at, which is first post. Alright, so what we'll need to do now is go back to our post block component. This is where each of the, let's make sure we know where we're at. If you go back to the home page, each of these, here, here, and here, these are post blocks, right? These are our little excerpts, right, for a post list. And we'll want it to be that when we click on here, we go to our post page, right? So that means we'll have to put a link around this title right here. Okay, so bring that in from Gatsby. Bring in link from Gatsby. Alright, and now where's this link going to go to, right? This needs to be decided dynamically, right? For example, for the first post post block, or sorry, the first post block, we'll want that to go to the page that has the route first post, right? So we don't want to hard code that in here. We want it to be able to update dynamically based on the post we're looking at. So we'll say 2 equals, and now we'll want to use the slug, right? And we should have that slug available, right? We can see up here that we've got this log to the console, so if we check that out, we would see it. So So you see in our post block object, we have node, and we don't have fields, which means we don't have slug. And you can probably guess the reason for that is that we haven't added that to our query in our index.js file. Alright, so if you go to index.js and right above excerpt, add in fields and then slug. Refresh your page just to make sure that it's there. Okay, now we see we have the fields object along with its corresponding slug. Good. Alright, so our link path should be 2 equals, and then we're going to use post.node.fields.slug. Okay, and if we go back to our home page, we can see that we have active links now. And if we click on them, we go to our corresponding blog post pages. Now, they always have the same title, so the only way you would know is if you check the URL up here. All right, so this one's first post. If I click on second post, it's second post. And if I click on third post, then it's third post. So it's working. Right, and that's fast linking as usual with Gatsby. We like that. Fast internal linking, that is. Alright, so we don't want these the annoying purple color and the annoying text underline, so we can fix that. So remember, links use anchor tags, so we can just use that as, we can use the anchor tag selector. Let's use the colors dark, slate, gray. And text decoration, none. Alright, so our links look better. Okay, but that's not all. We need to have, we need our posts to actually represent the blog post that we created in our markdown file. So we'll go back to our post.js file. And what we don't have is our data, right? The data that we need to inject into this post template we don't have. We need to use a query to get it. Right? We could just bring in the all markdown remark from a parent component and then loop over it again and grab what we need, but there's no point in doing that when Gatsby already gives us a way to get the data that's specific to this post. So if you go back to that bit in the Gatsby documentation on programmatically creating pages, and you scroll down to from where we were before, you'll see they actually have some code for their blog post.js. And we're calling ours just post.js. Right, and they've got a query right here. So go ahead and copy that. Bring it in your post.js file. Bring it in the usual way. Now this one doesn't have the all markdown remark. It just has markdown remark, right? Which means just for one specific markdown file. And you can see that we're bringing in the slug as a variable, and we can do that here because in our Gatsby node file we passed it along with the context here. So if you want to use something from your your data up here in your context here, make sure to add it to your query here, and then make sure to pass it along in your context here. All right, but we're not going to do that today. So again, you've got your slug. It's a variable. Of course, it's a string, and it's required. And we'll need not just the title from the front matter. We will need the image. So let's go into our index.js query and just grab that part. Paste that in here. And we'll also want the date and we'll want it with the format string bit. So grab that. Put it in here. Right now all of this should be available to us. Alright, so all we need to do is up here bring it in as the data object as usual. Right, and we can check it in the console. Alright, so we see we have the markdown remark object here. Right, and within it we have our HTML, which we're going to need, of course. We have our front matter with our date, our image, it's an actual image file and not a string, and the title. So we're good. Alright, so for now, let's simplify things by saying let a post equal data dot markdown remark. And then here we can say posts dot node. There's no node here, forgive me, it's just front matter. And if you're concerned about that, you can go back to your markdown remark object and see that you go right from markdown remark to the front matter. And again, so it's post dot front matter dot title. Okay, so if you go to your individual post page, and this time it's third post, you'll see that you have the correct title. Underneath that, we'll bring in the date, and we'll use a small tag for that. Give it a class name of post main date. That'll be post.frontmatter.date. Okay, and we get the date brought in. For the date, for metadata other than the title, I'd rather not use Railway as the font. I'd rather use Rubik, which we've been using before, or which we have used before. So in our post.css file, and also we want that date to be right up under the title as we did in our post list earlier. So we'll give that title a bottom margin of 0. Alright, that takes care of that. And then underneath, underneath the date, we'll add, just like before, a horizontal line. And so things are looking like that right now. And then we could just bring in the post body if we wanted to. So we would use a self-closing div. We can give it a class name of post main body. And we'll also need the dangerously set inner HTML property. And that needs a set of double curly braces. Double underscore, or is it double or triple? I think it's double underscore HTML. And then you've got post.html. Okay, and you brought in all of your all of the body here. Alright, so for the body text we'll use railway. And actually what we can do is we can just go up here and say main. So that takes care of everything except for the date, which we wanted to be rubric. Then of course we could also bring in, or we probably would want to bring in the image since we bothered to bring it into the project at all. In our home, on our home page, in our index page, right, it's a thumbnail, but for our blog post, I'd like it to be as wide as the post content, which is 50% of the page, and I'd like it to shrink accordingly as you resize your browser window or if you're switching to another device. We can put that right under the horizontal line above the main body text. So what we're going to need here is Gatsby Image, so bring that in. It doesn't really matter where you do that. And it takes a property called fluid, and this will be post.frontmatter.image.child.image_sharp.fluid, if you remember from the last video. Okay, so if we check our post page, we see the image comes in and it's exactly the width of the post content. Right, by default I think it's set to width 100%, and then we're just using the div that surrounds it, which just turns out to be the main content, and that restricts the width of the image. So if we were to resize our browser window, it would shrink accordingly. Of course, when we get smaller and smaller, we don't want it to be 50% of the width of the viewport, so we'll want to adjust for that using media queries, so we can do that. And we'll set the first breakpoint at 1300 pixels. And then we'll say let the width of the content be 60%. We'll set the next breakpoint at 1000, and we'll let the content be 70% in width. These are just arbitrary guesses on my part. You can mess around with the breakpoints and see where things look the best according to the content that you're adding. Set the next one at 750. Bump it up to 80%. Do a couple more. Set the next one at 550. This time we'll make it a smaller jump up to 85%. And we'll do one more at 450. And then we'll bring it up to 90%. Alright, so if we try to resize our page, we see we get bump up, bumps up a little bit more. We're finally down past, here we're at exactly 450, so that's 90% width, and then it just looks like it's going to be okay for an iPhone, for example. So if we click on this simulated iPhone, we see it looks alright. Of course our home page doesn't look very good. We've still got our content shrunk down to 50%. That's something that we set up in a previous video. But in fact, I'm going to redo this homepage because I never really wanted the post list to look like this. This was just an example of how to generate one. Okay, so for now, we've got our individual blog posts available just by going, from the home page. We clicking on a link, we can get to those individual blog post pages. So that's what we were supposed to accomplish in this video, was to dynamically create or programmatically create blog post pages that we could get to just by clicking on links. And then also, of course, in the beginning we handled that problem where some people were getting errors about the image field in their metadata having Gatsby inferring that field type as string rather than as a file type. So we fixed that as well. So I hope this video has helped you, and in the next video, or maybe not exactly in the next video, but in upcoming videos, what we'll deal with is setting up tags so that when you create a blog post, you can, in the metadata, you can add tags, corresponding tags. For example, if you're dealing with the topic of news or the topic of entertainment, you could add those tags, and then they would be displayed in your blog post. And then when a user clicked on one of those tags, they would see all of the posts in a list that had those tags attached to them. And then we'll also take care of pagination as well. And pagination is good because if you have hundreds and hundreds of posts and you try to load them all at once, it may be a while before the user can actually click on any of the posts to view their content. So we'll probably just create pagination where we limit our post loading to 3 posts per page, and that way those 3 posts can get loaded quickly and the user can quickly click on a post link and view that blog post without having to wait too long. So, as always, thank you for joining me, and I will see you next time. Cheers!